Good morning, Southdale. Grace and peace to you. It's Wednesday morning, December 6th, and we're back for another devotional in our Advent series, The Joy of Every Longing Heart. I'm Pastor Brad. I'm the pastor here at the Anderson Southdale Church of the Nazarene, and I just want to say thank you for joining us on this journey. As I've said the last couple days, these devotions go along with the readings in the Advent devotional guide from the Foundry called The Joy of Every Longing Heart. And they go along with our weekly services, our Sunday morning services here at Southdale. And so we're kind of doing devotions together as a church. You have the devotional guide to read together with your family, and these videos give me the chance to share some thoughts with you as well. And then we gather for worship on Sunday as we make this journey together. And I'm glad you are journeying with us. It is Wednesday, and it's the first Wednesday of the month, so just a quick reminder that we will gather at Southdale tonight at 6 o'clock p.m. for prayer meeting. Love to have you join us for that. Southdale is located on 53rd Street in Anderson, Indiana. We're the round church right next door to the towers. It's fairly easy to find. Love to have you join us in person for that. But whether you can be here in person or not, we're glad that you're sharing in these devotions with us. I mentioned yesterday that today I'm going to call a little bit of an audible. If you have your devotional guide, and there is a link in the description below if you need to order one, if you don't have one. If you have your devotional guide, you'll see that we're supposed to be reading from Mark chapter 13, both today and tomorrow. It's a section of Mark's gospel that sometimes is called the Little Apocalypse or the Olivet Discourse. Well, we will be reading that, and we'll be studying that in the videos tomorrow. But it is one of the features of apocalyptic literature. It is an apocalypse, and one of the features of apocalyptic literature is the imagery that is involved. And you'll see that tomorrow as we read Mark chapter 13, the imagery that Jesus uses to answer the disciples' question about the destruction of the temple. And the imagery used in apocalyptic frequently is not just something that somebody came up with off the top of their head. Instead, apocalyptic literature frequently draws on imagery that has been used in the past, especially among the Old Testament or the Hebrew prophets. And in Mark chapter 13, Jesus draws heavily on the imagery drawn from Daniel chapter 7. And so, in order to understand Mark chapter 13 better today and tomorrow, I'd like us to look at Daniel chapter 7 today. So, if you have your Bibles, you can find Daniel chapter 7, but we'll be putting the words here on the screen. Today, I'm reading from the New International Version, Daniel chapter 7, starting at verse 9. As I looked, Daniel says, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. And a river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. And thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him, and the court was seated, and the books were opened. And then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beast had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Now, we just read a portion out of the middle of Daniel chapter 7. If you have time, it might be good to stop and read all of Daniel chapter 7. And since this is pre-recorded, you can do that right now and not miss out on anything. We'll talk about the vision that precedes this part, and we'll talk about the interpretation that's given afterwards. I just didn't want to take the time in this video to read all of it. Our focus is on this middle section. That said, we need to remember that this too is apocalyptic literature. Technically speaking, this is not prophecy. At least the Hebrews, when they organized the Tanakh, when they organized the Hebrew scriptures, they did it in sections. The first section, the Torah, contained the instruction, the law, the teaching. The second section, called the Nevi'im, included the prophets, both the former prophets that told the history of Israel and the latter prophets that we would call the major and minor prophets in our English Bibles. And then come the Ketuvim, the writings, including the wisdom literature, the five scrolls, and in the Ketuvim is where the Hebrews placed the book of Daniel. It wasn't one of the Nevi'im, one of the prophets. It was one of the writings. Now, that's not to say that apocalyptic literature isn't prophetic by definition. Sometimes apocalyptic is prophetic, but the purpose of apocalyptic is not so much to announce what's going to happen in the future as it is to help God's people in the present make sense of the world. In other words, its purpose is not so much predictive as it is interpretive, teaching us how to understand what is going on around us. And as such, we should probably read Daniel 7 in that way, as if it's not so much about what's going to happen in the ultimate future, although it may have some implications on that. Its real meaning is to give us a message for today. There is a break in the book of Daniel between chapter 6 and chapter 7. In fact, chapter 7 kind of rewinds history. In Daniel chapter 5, the very last verse of Daniel chapter 5, Belshazzar, the final king of the Babylonians, dies, and the Persians conquer his kingdom. But when we get to Daniel chapter 7, verse 1, we find out that this vision that Daniel is describing is something that he saw in the first year of Belshazzar's reign. So we're stepping back in time, narratively speaking, to something Daniel saw earlier. And Daniel describes seeing a vision of 4 beasts. And in many ways, this reminds us of the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had of a statue made up of 4 parts in Daniel chapter 2. And as Daniel watches, he sees the Great Sea, the Mediterranean, being churned up by the 4 winds. Water sloshing everywhere as the weather competes there in the basin of the Mediterranean. And out of that chaos proceed 4 beasts. And these aren't ordinary beasts. These aren't ordinary animals. These are horrors, as befitting their origin, climbing up out of the chaos of the sea like this. The first beast, Daniel says, is a lion. Yet it's not just a lion. It's a lion that has the wings of an eagle. And Daniel watches as its wings are stripped off of it, and it stands up on its hind legs like a human and is given a human's mind. You can't help but remember how King Nebuchadnezzar, for a time, lived like a wild beast, but then God returned his mind and he stood up and was given his right mind, the king of Babylon. That's the first beast. The second beast is a bear. But again, this isn't just any ordinary bear. This bear is something monstrous, and the language Daniel uses is difficult to describe, to use, to understand. It's a bear, but this bear isn't your normal bear. This bear is lopsided. It's raised up on one side. There's something different about one side of this bear. And in its mouth, it has 4 ribs. And every time I've ever read this in the past, I imagined the bear was at a barbecue eating ribs. But at least commentator John Goldingay on Daniel says that might not be what's going on here. It's not so much that it's eating. It has these things growing out of its mouth. And so some translators have translated this Aramaic word that's used only once in all the Bible, because only Daniel is written in Aramaic, as tusks. But there's something different, something monstrous, something grotesque about its mouth, about its very self, and it's told to get up and gorge itself on flesh. And then there's a third beast, and it's a leopard, the fastest of all animals. And what's faster than a leopard? A leopard with wings. And this leopard has 4 wings and 4 heads, if you can imagine it. And then there comes a 4th beast out of the sea. And this beast is so monstrous, Daniel doesn't even try to tell us what kind of animal it is. He only tells us that it has iron teeth and trampling feet, and on its head are 10 horns, yet these horns aren't equal. But as Daniel watches, an 11th horn, a little horn, grows up among the other 10, pushing 3 of the other horns out of the way. And it has eyes like a human being, and it has a mouth like a human being, and it's uttering enormities, great, huge, boastful claims. And Daniel watches as these 4 monsters climb out of the sea. Now, the smart people who write the smart books, the smart people that write the fat books, have argued for a long time over what exactly these 4 beasts represent. Generally speaking, we know what they represent because after this dream, after this vision, an angel shows up to explain to Daniel what the vision means. And in verse 17, the angel tells Daniel that the 4 great beasts are 4 kings that will rise from the earth. But he never tells us what 4 kings or what 4 kingdoms are being referred to. It's easy to assume that the first, the lion that stands up and is given a mind of a man, represents Babylon. But after that, is it the Medes and then the Persians and then the Greeks? Or is it the Medes and the Persians and then the Greeks and then the Romans? Or is it something else? The smart people have argued about this for a long, long time. But remember, this is not so much about prediction as it is about interpretation. I don't think we need to know precisely what kingdoms are represented, though I have my own personal theories myself. I think the point is to show us how history works. As one kingdom rises, another kingdom falls, and each successive kingdom in many ways is worse than what goes before it. Each successive empire is stronger. Each successive empire is more wicked. Each successive empire does more violence and more damage. That's just how history goes. But then Daniel sees something else, and this is where our reading picked up in verse 9. While these 4 beasts are climbing out of the sea, while the little horn is making boastful statements, Daniel says he sees thrones being set up. Not one throne, but more than one. Why would we need more than one throne? And there is one who is seated on the thrones. He is the Ancient of Days, the one from eternity. It's God. And Daniel describes God in ways that describe his character more so than his appearance. The Ancient of Days has white clothing, a symbol of his purity, his holiness, his righteousness. He has hair that is white like wool, a symbol of his wisdom. And his throne is ablaze with fire, as a river of fire flows out from his throne, a symbol of his wrath. And so we have these two visions. On one hand, the kingdoms of the world, and on the other hand, the throne room of heaven itself. And the Ancient of Days is being attended to by the heavenly multitude, and books were opened. I told you Sunday night to remember the books, right? Remember, if you weren't here with us on Sunday night and you live in Anderson, join us Sunday night, 6 o'clock p.m. for evening worship. But the books were opened, these books that keep a record of everything that transpires on earth. Oh, the beast might be milling about, the horn might be boasting great things, but nothing is escaping the notice of heaven as God takes note of what happens in history in order to hold history and humanity accountable. And John says, well, all this is happening, the beast is killed. Where'd that come from? And thrown into the fire. What fire? It's so stunning. Daniel says he's watching, and all of a sudden the beast is gone and thrown into the fire. Who killed the beast? Well, it's almost as if Daniel says, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked. Because he explains. It's there at the end of our reading in verse 13 when he says, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence, and he was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshiped him, and his dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. It is the one like a son of man that finally triumphs over all the kingdoms of this world. And that is the point of this vision. We should probably notice some things about this. First of all, we should notice the one like a son of man. On one hand, he is human. That's what son of man means. The human one, I think, is how the Common English Bible translates it. That's what that phrase in Aramaic signifies. This is a descriptor of him. He is human. Yet at the same time, not only is he human, he is also divine. He acts with divine prerogative and is given divine authority. He's described as coming on the clouds of heaven. And who is it that rides the clouds? Well, if you remember back to Psalm chapter 68, Psalm 68 verse 4, it says, sing to God. Sing praise, sing in praise of his name. Extol him who rides on the clouds and rejoice before him. His name is the Lord. His name is Yahweh. God and God alone is the one who rides on the clouds. Yet the Son of Man comes and rides on the clouds and is given divine authority. Who do you suppose that could be? Who is it that is human and also divine? It's about introducing us to this figure, the Son of Man. It's also about showing us this Son of Man's victory. Daniel watches while the kingdoms of this world go from bad to worse to even worse still, until finally victory is won. And when the victory is won, it happens so quickly that there isn't even an account of the battle. The Son triumphs over the worst the world has to offer. In the interpretation section down after verse 15, the punchline of this vision is stated this way to Daniel. The interpreter says the court will sit, and the little horns, his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy ones of the Most High, and his kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. You see, this is a message of hope for people who find themselves in the middle of it. When it looks like things are going from bad to worse, Daniel reminds us that while we might be in the middle of it right now, the middle doesn't last forever. There is a time limit set. A time, times, and half a time, Daniel says. And I don't think the significance is so much in the exact length of time as it is in reminding us that it is finite. The kingdom of God lasts forever. Of his throne there is no end, but this world, the kingdoms and powers of this world, as evil as they might be, are always only temporary. And on the other side, there is, for the holy ones of God, a day of victory. That's the message of Daniel chapter 7. Take heart, beloved. It doesn't last forever. And Jesus wins the victory. I hope today that message of hope will help you as together we go into peace